Have you ever walked away from a conversation, maybe a meeting, a pitch, or even a personal talk-hand thought? It said everything, but nothing landed? You're not alone. We live in the most connected, communicative age in human history. We send more messages, attend more meetings, and share more opinions than ever before, and yet true influence feels rarer than ever. Why? Because we've confused volume with impact. We believe that to be heard, we must speak loudly, quickly, and often. But the most powerful leaders, negotiators, and communicators throughout history have known a different truth. Speak less, influence more. This isn't about silence as absence. It's about silence as presence. It's about choosing your words so carefully that each one carries weight. It's about listening so deeply that others feel truly seen. It's about commanding a room not by filling it with your voice, but by radiating calm, clarity, and quiet confidence. In the pages ahead, or rather, in the words you're about to hear, you'll discover how to communicate with fewer words and greater impact. You'll learn the psychology of influence, the power of nonverbal cues, and the strategies that allow you to build trust, command respect, and lead with authority without saying much at all. This is not a book about becoming quiet. It's about becoming unshakably present, and it starts with a simple realization. In a world shouting for attention, the most powerful voice is the one that chooses when not to speak. Now, let's begin with a story that reveals why we say too much and why it backfires. In the spring of 2019, Elena Martinez stood in front of the board of directors of a $2 billion logistics company. She had spent 3 months preparing. Her presentation ran 42 slides. She practiced her delivery 17 times. She anticipated every question. When she finished her 28-minute monologue filled with data, projections, competitor analyses, and contingency plans, there was polite applause. Then silence. One board member leaned forward. "Elena," he said gently, "I'm still not sure what you're asking us to do." She left the room confused, frustrated, and defeated. She had said everything except the one thing that mattered. 6 weeks later, she was passed over for the CEO role. Not because she lacked competence, but because her words had drowned out her message. We live in an age of verbal inflation. From open-plan offices buzzing with constant chatter to social media feeds overflowing with hot takes. We've been conditioned to believe that to be heard, we must speak loudly, quickly, and often. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you talk, the less people listen. This isn't opinion. It's neuroscience. The human brain processes spoken language at about 125 to 150 words per minute. Yet we think at 400 to 600 words per minute. That gap creates cognitive surplus mental space where listeners either drift into distraction or begin formulating their rebuttal. Before you finished your sentence, when you flood that space with excessive words, you don't increase your influence. You trigger what psychologists call cognitive load overload, a state where the listener's working memory is so taxed they can't retain, let alone act on, your core message. Consider these common habits: over-explaining simple decisions like saying, "I chose this vendor because blah blah blah," repeating points for emphasis which actually dilutes them. Apologizing preemptively, "Sorry to bother you, but..." Filling silence with nervous chatter. "So, yeah, anyway." Each of these behaviors signals one thing to the listener: insecurity, not incompetence, not lack of knowledge, but a subtle, subconscious anxiety that your point isn't strong enough to stand on its own. Research from Harvard Business School shows that leaders who use fewer words in meetings are consistently rated as more competent, decisive, and trustworthy, even when their actual content is identical to verbose peers. Why? Because brevity implies confidence. Confidence implies authority. Authority invites influence. In 2015, Fortune 500 CFO was presenting quarterly results to investors. Midway through, he began to clarify a dip in margins. What started as a 30-second explanation snowballed into a 7-minute tangent about supply chain delays, labor disputes, and market volatility. The room grew restless. Stock analysts exchanged glances. One later wrote, "He sounded defensive, not strategic." Within 48 hours, the company's stock dropped 4%. Not because of the numbers, but because of the narrative his over-talking created. We're losing control. Contrast this with Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors during the 2014 ignition switch crisis. In congressional testimony, she spoke plainly, directly, and sparingly. When asked about accountability, she said, "I am accountable. We will fix this." Jargon. No justifications, just clarity. Her restraint didn't hide the problem, it restored trust now. Here's an exercise you can try today. The 24-hour word audit. You can't fix what you don't measure. For one day, track every unnecessary word you speak. Use this simple log. In each situation, like a team meeting or email follow-up, note the words you spoke, your core message in 10 words or fewer, and whether you used unnecessary additions. At day's end, calculate your verbal efficiency ratio. Take the number of words in your core message, divide it by your total words spoken, and multiply by 100. If it's below 30%, you're leaking influence. Remember, in a world shouting for attention, the most powerful voice is the one that chooses when not to speak. Now, let's turn to a force even more powerful than speaking less, listening more. In a dimly lit room in Bogotá, Colombia, in 2003, FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss faced his most tense standoff yet. A man named Diego, distraught after losing custody of his children, had barricaded himself in an apartment with a pistol and a bottle of rum. He'd already fired one shot into the ceiling. For 2 hours, Diego ranted about injustice, betrayal, the system. Other negotiators urged Voss to take control of the conversation, to assert authority, to talk him down. Instead, Voss said almost nothing. When Diego paused, gasping for breath, Voss responded with just 3 words, spoken slowly and softly, "That sounds awful." Diego froze. Then he whispered, You get it?" 37 minutes later, Diego walked out unarmed, and in tears. Voss didn't persuade him with logic or promises. He didn't even offer solutions. He simply listened so deeply that Diego felt seen for the first time in years. Most people think good listening means nodding, maintaining eye contact, and not interrupting. That's active listening, a baseline skill. But strategic listening is different. It's not just about understanding words. It's about decoding emotion, uncovering hidden needs, and using silence as a tool to create psychological safety. Strategic listeners don't wait to speak. They wait to unlock. Psychologists call this empathic precision, the ability to reflect not just what someone said, but why they said it and what they're too afraid to say outright. There are 3 pillars of strategic listening. First, mirroring. Repeat. The last 1, 2, 3 words of what someone says, with a calm, inquisitive tone. If they say, "I'm just overwhelmed with this project," you respond, "Overwhelmed with this project?" This simple technique triggers the mirror neuron system, making the speaker feel understood at a neurological level. It also buys you time and often prompts them to reveal more. Second, labeling. Name the emotion you perceive. It seems like you're frustrated or you sound excited about this. Studies show that naming an emotion reduces its intensity in the brain's amygdala, the fear center. When you label someone's feeling accurately, you don't just acknowledge it, you diffuse it. Third, tactical empathy. This isn't about agreeing, it's about demonstrating. You understand their perspective as they see it. Example, from your point of view. This deadline feels arbitrary and disrespectful of your workload. Even if you disagree, this statement builds rapport because it validates their reality. Most people fear silence. They rush to fill it, fearing awkwardness, but an influence. Silence is leverage. After someone speaks especially. When sharing something emotional or important, wait, count silently. 1, 2, 3. In those seconds, one of three things happens. They clarify their point often, revealing deeper intent. They confess something they hadn't planned to share. They mentally own their statement, increasing commitment to it. This is why elite therapists, interrogators, and leaders use the 3-second rule. They know that the truth often lives in the pause. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft in 2014, he inherited a culture of internal competition and siloed thinking. In his first all-hands meeting, instead of delivering a grand vision, he asked one question: what would you do if you weren't afraid? Then he sat down and listened. For 45 minutes, employees spoke some tearfully about innovation stifled by bureaucracy, ideas killed by politics. Nadella took notes, said almost nothing. That silence did more than any keynote ever could. It signaled, your voice matters more than my speech. Within a year, employee engagement scores rose by 22%. Microsoft's market cap tripled in 5 years. All because a leader chose to receive before he projected. For the next 3 days, in every conversation, do not respond immediately when someone finishes speaking. Count silently to 3 in your head. Use that time to breathe. Observe their body language. And choose your words with intention. At first, it will feel unnatural living, rude. But within a week, you'll notice people leaning in, opening up, trusting you more. We assume authority comes from commanding attention, but neuroscience reveals the opposite. People grant authority to those who make them feel safe. When you listen deeply, you trigger the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone in the other person's brain. This chemical shift creates feelings of trust, loyalty, and cooperation. In contrast, when you dominate a conversation, you activate their threat response. Their brain goes into defense mode. This person is not safe. I must protect myself. Influence, then, isn't about being heard. It's about making others feel heard. So this week, in every important conversation, aim to speak less than 40% of the time. Let the other person fill 60% or more. Notice how your influence grows not through your words, but through your attention. As Ralph G. Nichols once said, the most basic of all human needs is the need to understand and be understood. The best way to understand people is to listen to them. In February 2014, Satya Nadella stood before Microsoft's senior leadership team for the first time as CEO. The company was floundering, its mobile strategy in shambles, morale low, culture fragmented by internal rivalry. Many expected a sweeping manifesto, a bold new vision with flashy slogans and aggressive targets. Instead, Nadella walked to the front of the room, paused, and said just 3 words: empathy, growth, clarity. He didn't explain them immediately. He let them hang in the air. Then he added, if we live these, everything else will follow. At that moment, sparse, deliberate, almost poetic, became the cornerstone of Microsoft's cultural renaissance. Within 5 years, the company's market value tripled. Employees reported the highest engagement in decades. Competitors took notice, all from 3 words. Not a 50-slide deck, not a 30-minute monologue, 3 words chosen with surgical precision. We've been taught that to be taken seriously, we must be thorough. The more details we provide, the more competent we appear. So we over-explain, over-qualify, and over-justify. But thoroughness is not the same as clarity. In fact, excessive detail often obscures your core message. Cognitive scientists call this the dilution effect. The more information you add, especially neutral or irrelevant, data the weaker your main point becomes. A classic study by psychologist Paul Slovic found that when people were shown a charity appeal featuring one identifiable child in need, they donated generously. But when the same appeal included statistics about thousands of suffering children, donations dropped by 50%. The extra data didn't help, it diluted emotional impact. The same applies to leadership communication. Every extra sentence risks burying your message under noise. Ernest Hemingway famously wrote, using the iceberg theory, If a writer knows enough about what he is writing about, he may omit things that he knows, and the reader will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. This means your authority comes not from what you say, but from what you imply through restraint. When you state only the essential, you force the listener to lean in. Their brain fills in the gaps, making them active participants in your message. This creates deeper buy-in than any exhaustive explanation ever could. Consider these two versions of the same directive. Version A, verbose. I think we should probably consider moving the launch date to next quarter because, the development team is still working through some bugs, and marketing hasn't finalized the campaign. And honestly, if we rush it, we might damage our brand reputation. So maybe Q3 would be safer? Version B, precise. We launch in Q3. Quality over speed. Which feels more confident? Which would you follow? Even smart, capable people leak influence through subtle linguistic habits. These verbal viruses signal doubt, deference, or disorganization. I just wanted to check. Gives implies your request is trivial. I actually think. Gives suggests you're contradicting yourself or feel defensive. Sorry to bother you. Apologizing for existing undermines your right to speak. Kind of, sort of, maybe. These qualifiers dilute conviction. Harvard's study found that removing just 3 filler words, just actually sorry, from professional emails increased perceived competence by 27%. Precision isn't about brevity alone, it's about strategic framing. The same idea, phrased differently, can inspire or irritate. For example, instead of "why did you do that?" try "help me understand your thinking." Instead of "this might be a bad idea, but," say "here's a bold approach." Instead of "I'm not sure, but," use "based on what I see." These aren't tricks. They're tools of psychological safety. They make others feel respected even when you disagree. A startup founder needed to re-engage a potential investor who'd gone silent after a lukewarm pitch. Instead of sending a desperate follow-up, just checking in. "Did you get my deck? Thoughts?" He wrote, "Your insight on AI ethics changed how we built our product. Would love your reaction." 10 words. No fluff. No ask. Just value plus curiosity. The investor replied within 2 hours and led the next funding round. Here's an exercise you can do every day. The 10-word challenge. Once a day, distill a key message into 10 words or fewer. It could be a team directive. Ship MVP by Friday. Perfection isn't the goal. A client update. Project on track. Key milestone hit Tuesday. Personal boundary. I'm unavailable after 6 p.m. for deep work. Post it where you'll see it. Say it out loud. Feel the power of compression. Over time, train your brain to identify the essence of every communication. When you speak with precision, you signal 3 things. First, clarity of thought. You've done the mental work. Second, respect for others, time you value their attention. Third, confidence in your position. You don't need to over-justify. In contrast, verbosity often masks uncertainty. The more you explain, the more you imply your point isn't strong enough to stand alone. As Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century, "I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time." True. Mastery lies in elimination. So this week, in every email, meeting, or conversation, cut your word count by 30%. Replace explanations with declarations. Replace qualifiers with clean statements. Notice how people respond not with confusion, but with increased focus and respect. As Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, perfection is achieved, not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away.
Ow.
Let's turn from words to the silent language that speaks even louder. Body language. In 2015, during tense negotiations over Greece's financial bailout, a single photograph went viral across global media. It showed German Chancellor Angela Merkel seated at a table with French President François Hollande and Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras. Tsipras leaned forward, arms crossed. Hollande gestured emphatically. But Merkel, calm, composed, sat with her hands interlaced in front of her, forming a subtle diamond shape. The internet dubbed it the Merkel rhombus. To casual observers, it was just a hand gesture. But body language experts saw something deeper. It's a masterclass in nonverbal authority, while others projected anxiety or aggression. Merkel's stillness signaled control, patience, and unshakable resolve. She said little during those talk shit. She dominated the room and she got what she wanted. Strict austerity measures. Enforced, her words were few. Her influence was total, because her body had. Already spoken? You've likely heard the famous statistic. Communication is 55% body language, 38% tone, and only 7% words. While the exact percentages are debated, the core insight remains unshaken. People believe your body before they believe your mouth. Why? Because your verbal brain can lie. Your limbic system, the ancient emotional core of your brain, cannot. It broadcasts your true state through microgestures, posture shifts, and eye behavior. Often without your conscious control, when your words say "I'm confident," but your shoulders are hunched and your eyes darting. Your audience believes the body. Every time, in 2010, Harvard researcher Amy Cuddy ignited a global movement with her TED Talk on power poses, standing like Wonder Woman to boost testosterone and reduce cortisol. But in later research, Cuddy refined her stance. She realized that dominance postures, hands on hips, chest thrust out, might increase personal confidence, but they can also trigger defensiveness in others. The more effective alternative? Presence poses. These are postures that convey calm authority, not aggression. Feet shoulder width apart. Weight evenly distributed, shoulders relaxed down, not pulled back artificially, hands visible. Open or gently clasped, chin level, not tilted up or down. Presence says, I am here. I am steady. I am not a threat, but I will not be moved. Your face reveals more than you think, especially in high-stakes moments. Consider these common leakage signals. Lip compression, biting or pressing. Lips, suppressed frustration or anxiety. Eyebrow flash, quick raise. Surprise but if held too long. Insincerity, nose wrinkle, disgust or disagreement if you're nodding yes. Excessive blinking, stress or cognitive overload. Key isn't to suppress these, it's to notice them in yourself, so you can regulate your inner state. Staring too long feels invasive. Looking away too often signals evasiveness. The sweet spot? The 70/30ths rule. Maintain eye contact 70% of the time while listening. Hold it 30% of the time while speaking. This balance conveys engagement without intimidation. And crucially, break eye contact downward, not to the side. Looking down suggests thoughtfulness. Looking sideways suggests deception. Watch footage of Nelson Mandela walking into a room, or Warren Buffett during a shareholder meeting, or Serena Williams before a critical serve. What do they share? Unhurried stillness, fidgeting tapping pens, shifting weight, playing with hair signals, nervous energy. Stillness, by contrast, broadcasts control. It says, I am so grounded. I don't need to move to feel safe. This is why elite military officers are trained to stand motionless for long periods. Why Zen monks sit in silence for hours. Why the most powerful people in a room often say the least, move the least. When a major tech company faced a data breach scandal, its CEO walked into a press conference amid flashing cameras and shouted questions. Reporters expected defensiveness, anger, or panic. Instead, she stood calmly at the podium, placed her notes down, waited 5 full seconds in silence as the room quieted, then said, We failed you. Here's how we'll fix it. On the evening of December 6, 2012, President Barack Obama stood in the White House briefing room to address the nation after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. 20 children, aged 6 and 7, had been murdered. The world expected rhetoric, grand statements, promises of action, moral outrage. Instead, Obama began with silence. He walked to the podium, looked down, took a slow breath, waited 3 full seconds, Then, voice trembling with restrained grief, he said, "We've endured too many of these tragedies in the past few years." His tone was low, his pace deliberate, his pauses long, almost uncomfortable. He didn't rush to fill the space. He let the weight of the moment settle. Millions watched. Few spoke afterward, not because of his words, but because of how he carried them. In that speech, Obama demonstrated a profound truth. Influence isn't carried by language. It's carried by resonance, and resonance lives in tone, pace, and silence. Your voice is your emotional fingerprint. Before your words register cognitively, your listener's brain processes your vocal tone for signals of safety or threat. Neuroscientists call this bida. Precede the melody of speech. It includes pitch high versus low, volume soft versus loud, tempo fast versus slow, rhythm smooth versus staccato high-pitched. Rapid voice triggers the amygdala of the brain's alarm system. It reads as anxiety or urgency. A low-pitched. Measured voice activates the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought. It reads as calm and control. This is why Morgan Freeman's voice can narrate a documentary about nuclear war and still feel soothing, and why a frantic email read aloud by a panicked colleague can send a team into chaos even if the content is neutral. Most people treat silence as dead air and air to be corrected. But master communicators treat silence like punctuation. A pause before a key statement builds anticipation. A pause after a hard truth lets it land. A pause during a question gives space for reflection. Consider these two versions of the same feedback. Version A, no pause. You missed the deadline again, and it's causing serious problems. Version B, with pause. You missed the deadline again, 2-second pause, and it's causing serious problems. The second version is heavier, more serious, more memorable. The silence acts like a drumbeat before the sentence's emotional climax. When asked a difficult question by a board member, a client, or an angry employer, instinct is to answer immediately, to prove you're on top of things, but elite leaders do the opposite. They pause. The power pause, 3 to 5 seconds of deliberate silence, achieves 3 things. First, it signals thoughtfulness. You're not reacting, you're responding. Second, it resets emotional temperatures and theirs. Third, it creates space for higher quality answers by engaging your prefrontal cortex, not your fight or flight response. Former Secretary of State James Baker was legendary for this. In tense diplomatic meetings, he'd let questions hang for so long that foreign ministers would nervously rephrase them often, revealing their true agenda in the process. We speak faster when we're nervous, but speed reads as insecurity, not efficiency. Research from the University of Michigan found that speakers who talk at 120 to 1, 140 words per minute, are rated as most credible. Faster than that? You seem anxious. Slower? Boring. But more important than speed is variability. Monotone speech, even at the right pace, loses attention. Strategic variation slowing for emphasis. Quickening for energy creates vocal texture that holds interest. Try this. Record yourself reading a short paragraph. Then read it again, but drop your pitch by 10%, slow your pace by 20%. Insert a 2-second pause before the final sentence. Listen back. Which version sounds more like a leader? When Indra Nooyi became CEO of PepsiCo, she was often the only woman and person of color in executive rooms. Early on, she spoke quickly, trying to keep up with male peers. Then a mentor told her, "You don't need to match their pace. You need to set your own." She began speaking slower, pausing longer, letting her sentences breathe. Within months, colleagues described her as unflappable, wise, and in control. Her influence grew not because her ideas changed, but because her delivery embodied calm authority. Here's an exercise you can do once this week. The record and refine your voice audit. Record a 2-minute message, maybe a voicemail, team update, or personal reflection. Listen back and ask, did I speak faster when nervous? Did my pitch rise at the end of statements, making them sound like questions? Did I rush through important points? Where could a pause have added power? Then re-record the same message, applying these fixes. Lower your baseline pitch slightly. Slow your pace by 15%. Add 1 3-second pause before your key point. Compare the two. Feel the difference in perceived authority. Trust isn't built on facts. It's built on emotional safety, and your voice is the primary carrier of emotional safety. A warm, steady, measured tone says, "You can relax. I've got this." A sharp, erratic, or high-pitched tone says, "Danger, uncertainty, stress, and leadership." Your team doesn't just follow your strategy, they follow your emotional frequency. And you broadcast that frequency through your voice. So this week, in every important conversation, speak 10% slower than feels natural. Insert one intentional pause longer than you think is comfortable. Notice how people lean in, listen more closely, and grant you more space. As Doug Larson once said, "Wisdom is the reward you get for a lifetime of listening when you'd have preferred to talk." Let's move beyond tone and posture to something even more foundational: presence itself. In 2008, during the height of the financial crisis, Warren Buffett walked into a packed shareholder meeting at Berkshire Hathaway's Omaha headquarters. The stock market was crashing. Investors were panicking. Reporters expected a defensive, data-heavy performance. Instead, Buffett strolled on stage in his rumpled suit, sipped a cherry Coke, smiled gently at the crowd, and sat down. He didn't gesture wildly. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. For the next 4 hours, he answered questions with folksy wisdom, dry humor, and quiet confidence. Between answers, he simply sat, still, relaxed, present, yet the room hung on every word. Not because of what he said, but because of how he occupied space. Buffett never tried to command attention. He radiated calm so deeply that attention flowed to him like water downhill. That's the essence of true presence. You don't take up space, you anchor it. Most people confuse presence with charisma, which they assume requires extroversion, theatricality, or non-stop engagement. But presence is quieter, deeper, and far more powerful. Presence is the ability to be fully here. Now, without needing to alter your environment or prove your worth, it's not about how you move your body. It's about how you inhabit your body. Neuroscience confirms this. When you are truly present, your brain operates in a state of coherence where heart rate, breath, and brain waves synchronize. This state emits subtle bioelectric signals that others subconsciously detect as calm, safety, and trustworthiness. In short, people don't just see your presence, they feel it. In the 1960s, anthropologist Edward T. Hall coined the term proxemics, the study of how humans use space in communication. He identified 4 zones: intimate 0 to 18 inches, reserved for close relationships; personal 1.5 to 4 feet, friends and casual conversation; social 4 to 12 feet, professional interactions; public feet and beyond. Speaking to groups violating these zones creates discomfort, but mastering them creates influence. For example, stepping slightly into someone's personal space during a negotiation can signal confidence if done calmly and briefly. But lingering to long reads as aggression. Conversely, standing too far back in a team huddle can signal disengagement. Even if you're speaking, the key is intentional positioning. In 181s, sit or stand at a slight angle, not directly face-to-face, which feels confrontational in groups. Position yourself where you can see everyone and they can see you without dominating the center. In conflict, increase distance slightly to de-escalate. Decrease it slightly to reconnect you. Don't need to pace, gesture, or work the room to command it. In fact, stillness is often more powerful. The still center techniques by actors, martial artists, and elite leaders works like this. Ground your feet, feel your weight evenly distributed. Imagine roots growing into the floor. Breathe into your belly, not your chest. Deep diaphragmatic breaths, lower heart rate, and project calm. Relax your shoulders. Tension here broadcasts stress even if your words are calm. Gaze softly, not fixed, not darting soft focus, like you're seeing the whole room at once. When you embody this state, you become a calm epicenter. Others naturally orient toward you not because you demand it, but because your energy offers stability in chaos. We've all felt it. The flutter in the chest before a pitch, the dry mouth before a tough conversation, the urge to fidget before walking into a room. This is adrenaline without outlet. Instead of suppressing it, redirect it. Try this 90-second pre-entrance ritual. Power breath. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6. Repeat 3 times. Body scan. Starting at your toes, mentally release tension up to your scalp. Anchor phrase silently say, I am here. I am ready. Enter last. Let others go first. Walk in with purpose, not speed. This isn't about appearing calm. It's about becoming calm. Your presence is authentic. It's not acted. During a NATO summit in 2016, a U.S. 4-star general entered a room where Allied officers were arguing loudly over strategy. Instead of interrupting, he walked to the far side, poured himself a glass of water, and sat silently. No eye contact, no sighs, no impatience. The room gradually quieted. After 10 minutes of near total silence, someone finally asked, General, your thoughts? He set down his glass, looked around slowly, and said, If we're not aligned, no plan will work. His silence hadn't been passive. It had been strategic reset. By refusing to engage the chaos, he forced the group to confront their own disarray, seek his leadership. Here's an exercise you can practice daily, a 5-minute centering ritual. Stand or sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply for 60 seconds. Ask, where am I holding tension? Release it. Ask, what energy do I want to radiate today? Calm, clarity, strength. Visualize that energy filling your body like light. Open your eyes. Move through your day from this center. Do this before meetings, calls, or difficult conversations. Over time, centering becomes your default state, not a tactic. So this week, in your next 3 group interactions, do not be the first to speak. Enter calmly. Sit or stand with grounded posture. Let the energy of the room settle before you contribute. Notice how your words carry more weight when they emerge from stillness. As Abraham Maslow said, the ability to be in the present moment is a major component of mental wellness. When you embody this state, you become a calm epicenter. Others naturally orient toward you not because you demand it, but because your energy offers stability in chaos. We've all felt it. The flutter in the chest before a pitch, the dry mouth before a tough conversation, the urge to fidget before walking into a room. This is adrenaline without outlet. Instead of suppressing it, redirect it. Try this 90-second pre-entrance ritual. Power breath. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6. Repeat 3 times. Body scan. Starting at your toes, mentally release tension up to your scalp. Anchor phrase silently say, I am here. I am ready. Enter last. Let others go first. Walk in with purpose, not speed. This isn't about appearing calm. It's about becoming calm. Your presence is authentic. It's not acted. During a NATO summit in 2016, a U.S. 4-star general entered a room where Allied officers were arguing loudly over strategy. Instead of interrupting, he walked to the far side, poured himself a glass of water, and sat silently. No eye contact, no sighs, no impatience. The room gradually quieted. After 10 minutes of near total silence, someone finally asked, General, your thoughts? He set down his glass, looked around slowly, and said, If we're not aligned, no plan will work. His silence hadn't been passive. It had been strategic reset. By refusing to engage the chaos, he forced the group to confront their own disarray, seek his leadership. Here's an exercise you can practice daily, a 5-minute centering ritual. Stand or sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply for 60 seconds. Ask, where am I holding tension? Release it. Ask, what energy do I want to radiate today? Calm, clarity, strength. Visualize that energy filling your body like light. Open your eyes. Move through your day from this center. Do this before meetings, calls, or difficult conversations. Over time, centering becomes your default state, not a tactic. So this week, in your next 3 group interactions, do not be the first to speak. Enter calmly. Sit or stand with grounded posture. Let the energy of the room settle before you contribute. Notice how your words carry more weight when they emerge from stillness. As Abraham Maslow said, the ability to be in the present moment is a major component of mental wellness. On March 15, 2019, a white supremacist opened fire on 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, killing 51 worshippers during Friday prayers. Within hours, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern stood before the nation. The world expected a fiery condemnation, a call for justice, perhaps a security crackdown. Instead, Ardern spoke for just under 3 minutes. Her words were few, direct, and human. They are us. We, in New Zealand, will give them a home. You may have chosen us, but we utterly reject and condemn you. She did not speculate, did not grandstand, did not over-explain. She offered clarity without clutter, empathy without performance. Then she did something even more powerful. She stopped talking. She visited the grieving families, but didn't give press interviews. She wore a hijab as a sign of solidarity, but didn't comment on the symbolism. She led a national moment of silence and let the silence speak in a time of chaos. Her restraint became a vessel for collective grief, unity, and resolve. Polls showed 89% of New Zealanders, across ethnic and political lines, trusted her leadership not because she said everything, but because she said only what mattered. We've been taught that trust is built through openness, sharing struggles, admitting mistakes, showing the real you. And while vulnerability can build connection, indiscriminate disclosure erodes credibility. Brené Brown, who pioneered research on vulnerability, is often misquoted. She never said share everything. She said, vulnerability is discernment, sharing with people who have earned the right to hear your story. Strategic restraint means sharing with purpose, not impulse. It means asking, will this disclosure serve the relationship or my need to be seen? Does this person have the capacity to hold this information with care? Is this the right moment, or am I speaking from emotion? Oversharing, especially early in a relationship, often backfires. It creates burden, not bonding. When we're anxious about being misunderstood, we over-explain. We justify. We repeat. We add caveats. But this doesn't clarify, it confuses. Psychologists call this the explanation paradox. The more you explain, the more you imply your point isn't trustworthy on its own. Example, I know this might sound harsh, and I don't mean it that way, but maybe we should delay the launch. Compared to, we delay the launch. The second statement assumes trust. The first one betrays doubt in yourself and in your listener's ability to handle. Trust is built in the space you don't fill. When a tech startup had to lay off 15% of its staff during a funding winter, the CEO faced a room of devastated employees. Many leaders would have over-justified. It's the market. We tried everything. It's not personal. Instead, she stood quietly and said, this is on me. I committed to your livelihoods, and I couldn't protect them all. I'm sorry. Your severance, outplacement, and healthcare are covered for 6 months. I'll be in the hallway after, no titles, just human to human. She didn't defend. Didn't blame the board. Didn't promise a quick rebound. She took responsibility and stopped talking. Employees left heartbroken, but without bitterness. Many later became customer advocates or returned when the company rebounded. Her restraint had preserved dignity for them and for herself. Before speaking in a high-trust context with your team, partner, or client, run your words through these 3 filters. Is it necessary? If the relationship would be unchanged if you didn't say it, don't. Is it kind? Not nice, but kind in the sense of serving their growth or well-being. Is it timely? Even truth can wound if delivered too soon or too late. If it passes all three, speak. If not, hold it. Here's an exercise you can practice this week. The trust filter 3 questions before you speak. For 1 week. Pause before any emotionally charged or high-stakes communication and ask, what do I hope this achieves? If the answer is to feel heard or to vent, reconsider. How will this land for them, not for me? Would I say this if they were in their most vulnerable state? If you can't answer with clarity and care, wait. This builds the muscle of relational responsibility, the foundation of deep trust in a culture that glorifies transparency. And keeping it real, restraint is often mistaken for coldness or secrecy, but true restraint is the opposite of avoidance. It's chosen silence born of respect, timing, and emotional maturity. When you hold back unnecessary words, you communicate. You respect their capacity to handle ambiguity. You value the relationship more than your need to explain. You are secure enough not to seek constant validation that's not distance. It's dignified closeness. So this week, identify one relationship where you tend to over-explain or overshare. For 7 days, speak 30% less in that dynamic. Replace explanations with presence. Replace justifications with clean statements. Notice how trust deepens when you stop trying to manage their perception. Start honoring their intelligence. As a Japanese proverb says, the ability to be silent at the right moment speaks louder than 1,000 words. Let's turn inward to the source of so much unnecessary talking. The inner CHATTERBOX. Daniel Park had built his AI startup from a dorm room into a $50 million valuation. Investors loved his vision. Engineers admired his technical depth. But in board meetings, he couldn't stop talking. He'd interrupt, over-explain, defend every metric. Reassure, clarify, rephrase often, talking for 20 minutes straight. His CFO once joked, I've seen him answer a yes-no question with a TED Talk. Then came the Series B pitch. He had 30 minutes with top-tier VCS. By minute 12, he was deep in neural network architecture tangents. The partners exchanged glances. One checked his watch. Another typed an email. They passed. Later, one investor told him plainly, you're brilliant, but you don't trust your audience to keep up, so you drown them. Great leaders don't explain, they inspire. That night, Daniel sat alone in his office and asked the hardest question, why do I talk so much? The answer wasn't strategy, it was fear. Most over-talking isn't arrogance, it's anxiety in disguise. We talk too much because we fear being misunderstood. We worry silence will be read as incompetence. We need external validation if they're listening. I must be valuable. We're trying to control the narrative if I explain enough. They'll agree. This is the inner chatterbox, the voice that says, say more, prove it, defend yourself. But here's the paradox. The more you try to control perception through words, the less control you actually have, because influence isn't granted by how much you say, it's granted by how secure you appear. Many professionals, especially high achievers, believe that silence equals unpreparedness. So they over-prepare out loud, filling space with data, caveats, and contingencies. But research from Stanford shows the opposite. Leaders who speak concisely after a pause are rated as more prepared and strategic than those who speak immediately and at length. Why? Because pausing implies processing. Rambling implies panic. Your audience doesn't need to hear your entire thought process. They need to hear your conclusion with confidence. To quiet the inner chatterbox, you must rewire your subconscious beliefs. Try this daily affirmation, spoken aloud with conviction. My silence is not absence. It is presence. My silence is not weakness. It is strength. My silence is not uncertainty. It is clarity waiting to land. Repeat it for 21 days. Pair it with deep breathing. Over time, your nervous system will begin to associate silence with power, not peril. The gap between impulse and action is where freedom lives. To widen that gap, practice these techniques. First, the 5-second breath anchor when you feel the urge to interrupt or over-explain. Inhale for 3 seconds, hold for 1, exhale for 4. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, dampening the fight or flight response. Second, the thought label when your inner voice says, you need to clarify that. Simply label it. That's fear talking. That's insecurity. The emotion reduces its power. Third, the post-conversation review after meetings. Ask, when did I speak from clarity? When did I speak from anxiety? What would silence have offered in that moment? This builds self-awareness without self-judgment. After his Series B failure, Daniel Park worked with a communication coach. Instead of trimming his pitch, they rebuilt it around silence. He opened with, we believe AI should serve humanity, not replace it. Pause 3 seconds. Then showed one slide, a photo of a nurse using his software to save time with patients. He said nothing for 10 seconds. Let the image speak. Total pitch time, 11 minutes. Result, he raised $40 million, twice his original target. Why? Because his restraint made his conviction undeniable. Here's an exercise you can practice daily, a thought-to-speech delay drill for 1 week. In low-stakes conversations like coffee with a colleague or a team, check and commit to a 3-second delay between thought and speech. Use that time to breathe and ask, is this necessary? Is this kind? Is this clear? If yes, speak. If no, let it go. Start small. Within days, you'll notice fewer filler words, more impactful statements. In a calmer inner state, you cannot perform silence. You can only embody it. And embodiment begins when you stop treating silence as a tactic. Start treating it as a state of being. When your inner world is noisy, your outer world will be too. But when you cultivate inner quiet through breath, presence, and self-trust, your words naturally become fewer, clearer, and more powerful. In 1994, Nelson Mandela stood before a roaring stadium in Soweto. He had just been elected South Africa's first black president after 27 years in prison. Millions expected a fiery victory speech denouncing apartheid, celebrating triumph, demanding justice. Instead, Mandela walked to the microphone, raised a single hand for silence, and said just one sentence, "Let us never forget that we are one nation." Then he stepped back. The crowd fell utterly still, then erupted not in rage, but in tears, cheers, and unity. That moment became iconic not for its volume, but for its quiet certainty. Mandela didn't need to persuade. His presence forged in decades of silence, reflection, and restraint carried more weight than any oration. He proved a timeless truth. Charisma isn't loud. It lingers. We've been sold a lie that charismatic leaders are gregarious, animated, and constantly on. But study history's most magnetic figures: Roosevelt's, Rosa Parks, Mahatma Gandhi, Marie Curie. You'll find a common thread. They were profoundly quiet. Charisma isn't about personality. It's about presence with purpose. Psychologists define true charisma as warmth, the ability to make others feel safe, power, the ability to act with conviction, presence, the ability to be fully here. Now notice, none require volume. In fact, quiet confidence amplifies all three. When you're not performing, people sense authenticity. When you're not rushing, they feel respected. When you speak rarely but meaningfully, your words gain weight. Loud charisma grabs attention quickly, but fades fast. Quiet charisma builds slowly, but endures. Why? Because it's rooted in consistency, not performance. Consider Jacinda Ardern again. She never gave rousing war cries. Yet after the Christchurch attack, citizens left flowers at Parliament with notes, "Thank you for holding us." Or consider Satya Nadella at Microsoft. No grand pronouncements, just steady, empathetic leadership. 5 years later, Employees describe him as the calm in the storm. This is the slow burn effect. Quiet leaders don't ignite crowds, they ignite trust, which compounds over time into loyalty, innovation. In resilience, top talent doesn't follow hype. They follow substance. A study of Fortune 500. Leadership teams found that executives who spoke less but with higher clarity attracted 37% more high-performing direct reports over a 3-year period. Why? Because quiet leaders create space for others' genius. They signal emotional safety. I won't interrupt or dominate. They reward depth over speed, as one Google engineering lead put it. I'd rather work for someone who listens deeply than someone who talks brilliantly. During a high-risk hostage rescue mission in the Horn of Africa, a U.S. Navy SEAL team faced a split-second decision: storm the compound now, or wait for backup. The junior officers argued, some for speed, some for caution. The commander, Lieutenant Hayes, stood silently at the edge of the huddle. He didn't interrupt, didn't gesture, didn't raise his voice. After 90 seconds of debate, he stepped forward, made eye contact with each man, said 2 words: "We wait." No explanation, no justification. The team moved instantly, not out of obedience, but trust. They knew his silence meant he'd already weighed every variable. Later, SEAL said, "The loudest leader I ever followed never raised his voice. He just stood in his truth so completely you couldn't help but follow." Here's an exercise you can try this week: the quiet impact feedback loop, for 1 week. After every significant interaction, ask one trusted colleague or peer, when did I speak with quiet confidence this week? When did my silence create space for others? Record their answers. Look for patterns. Over time, you'll see how restraint builds relational capital in invisibility. In a world of noise, calm is magnetic. Neuroscience explains why. Your amygdala for center comes in the presence of a regulated nervous system. Your mirror neurons mimic the emotional state of those around you. Your prefrontal cortex logic center engages more when not flooded by others' anxiety, so when you embody quiet confidence, you don't just let you regulate the room. That's not charisma as performance, it's charisma as service. So this week, in every group setting, speak 50% less than usual. Replace statements with questions. Replace explanations with silence. At week's end, ask one trusted peer, did my presence feel stronger this week, even though I said less? As Edith Sitwell said, the older I grow, the more I listen to people who don't talk much. Now, let's explore the most refined skill of all: discernment, knowing precisely when to speak and when to stay silent. In 2012, Malala Yousafzai was shot in the head by the Taliban for advocating girls' education in Pakistan. She nearly died. When she awoke in a hospital in Birmingham, England, the world expected her to retreat into silence or to lash out in anger instead. After months of recovery, she chose her words with surgical precision. In her first public statement, she didn't condemn her attackers, didn't plead for pity, didn't launch a political manifesto. She said, "They thought a bullet would silence us, but nothing changed in my life except this: weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage were born." Just 38 words. That statement, calm, clear, and unshakable, lighted a global movement. It led to a Nobel Peace Prize. It inspired millions. Malala didn't speak often, but when she did, the world leaned in. Her power wasn't in volume. It was in discernment, knowing exactly when, why, and how to use her voice. Not all silence is wise. But in these 5 high-stakes situations, strategic silence is your greatest asset. First, during emotional outbursts, so when someone is angry, hurt, or overwhelmed. Your words, even well-intentioned ones, will be heard as noise or defensiveness. Stay silent. Breathe. Let them empty their emotional cup. Then say, "I'm here when you're ready." Second, in the face of ambiguity, when data is incomplete or the path unclear, rushing to speak creates false certainty. Say, "I don't know yet. Let me think." Then pause. Your restraint signals intellectual honesty. Third, When power is being tested in negotiations or power plays, the first to speak often reveals their hand, let them fill the void. Their anxiety will expose their real position. Fourth, after delivering hard truth once you've given difficult feedback or bad news, stop talking. Give silence lets the message land. Over-explaining dilutes accountability. Fifth, when your words would serve ego, not purpose, ask, am I speaking to clarify or to be seen? If it's the latter, stay silent. Conversely, there are times when silence is complicity. Speak clearly, courageously, and without apology. When first injustice is occurring, not speaking up in the face of discrimination. Abuse or ethical breach signals tacit approval. Gives you simple, direct language that's not acceptable. Second, vision needs articulation when your team is lost. Fearful or fragmented, they need a clear North Star. Speak with conviction. This is who we are. This is where we're going. Third, closure is required at the end of projects, relationships, or conflicts. People need resolution. Offer clarity. Here's what we learned. Here's how we move forward. Great communicators don't just know what to say, they know when. They watch for the influence threshold. The precise moment when the room is ready to receive their message. Signs you've reached it. Body language shifts from closed to open and crossed arms. Leaning in emotional intensity stabilizes questions turn from what happened to what now. Silence becomes curious, not hostile if you speak before the threshold. You're ignored if you speak after. You're redundant, but if you speak it's unforgettable. During a major product failure at a consumer tech firm, the engineering team panicked. Marketing wanted a press statement. Executives demanded blame assignment. The CEO did nothing for 48 hours. He gathered facts, listened to customers, held space for his team's grief and fear. On day 3, he sent a company-wide email titled, "What We Owe Our Users." It was 127 words long. No excuses. No jargon. Just accountability and next steps. Employee trust surged. Customer churn dropped by 60% because he waited for the right moment, not the fastest one. Here's a practical tool. The silence, speak decision matrix. Before any high-stakes communication, ask, am I speaking to serve others or myself? Is the audience ready to hear this? Will silence create safety or enable harm? If you're serving others, the audience is ready, and silence would enable harm speak. Otherwise, consider silence. Words are cheap. Anyone can say them, but well-timed words are rare and transformative. That's because influence isn't about information transfer. It's about emotional and cognitive readiness. When you align your voice with the moment, your few words carry the weight of 1,000. So this week, identify one upcoming conversation where you'd normally speak immediately. Instead, wait 24 hours if possible, or pause for 10 full seconds if urgent. Ask, is this the right moment? Then act accordingly. As Thomas Carlyle wrote, speech is human. Silence is divine. At Amazon's leadership offsites, a curious ritual unfolds before every strategic discussion. Executives gather around a table. The leader places a 6-page memo in front of each person. Then no one speaks. For 30 full minutes, they read in silence. No presentations. No summaries. No verbal priming. Only after everyone has read and reflected does the conversation begin. Jeff Bezos instituted this silent start protocol because he believed if you have to explain your idea out loud before people can understand it, it's not clear enough. The result? Deeper thinking. Fewer groupthink moments. More dissenting voices heard. And decisions that stick. This isn't just a meeting tactic. It's a philosophy of leadership. Create space. And intelligence will fill it. Most leaders believe their job is to provide direction, answers, and energy. But Google's Project Aristotle, the largest study of team effectiveness in history, revealed the opposite. The number one predictor of high-performing teams isn't IQ, experience, or even vision. It's psychological safety. The belief that you won't be punished for speaking up, and the fastest way to build psychological safety. The leader talks less. When you dominate airtime, you signal, "My thinking matters more than yours." When you create silence, you signal, "I trust your mind as much as my own." This invites risk-taking curiosity. And honest feedback, the fuel of innovation. Instead of opening meetings with updates or directives, elite leaders begin with questions. What's one thing we're missing? Where do you feel stuck? What's working that we should double down on? This inverts the power dynamic. It says, you are the expert in your domain. I'm here to listen and connect. A study of hospital teams found that when leaders used ask-first framing, error reporting increased by 42%, not because more mistakes happened, but because people felt safe to surface them. Safety isn't built through reassurance. It's built through invitation. The average knowledge worker spends 31 hours per month in unproductive meetings. Why? Because leaders treat meetings as output, not input. But when leaders commit to verbal economy, meetings transform. Agendas become promises. We will decide X in 30 minutes. Updates move offline, shared via email or docs before the meeting discussion focuses on decisions. Not data at base camp. Teams cap meetings at 30 minutes and require a written brief in advance. If the leader can't clarify the purpose in writing, the meeting is canceled. Result? More focus. Less burnout. Higher trust. During a critical debate about entering the healthcare market, Amazon executives gathered with their usual 6-page memos. After 30 minutes of silent reading, a junior product manager who had never spoken in a leadership meeting before raised her hand. She pointed to a flaw in the customer journey map no one had seen. The room listened. The strategy shifted. Later, she said, "If Jeff had started talking right away, I never would have spoken. But his silence gave me permission." That's the power of restraint as leadership. Here's an exercise you can try this week. The 1-minute brief rule for your next team meeting. Apply this rule. You speak for only 1 minute at the start. In that minute, you state only the decision to be made, the time allotted, one catalytic question example. Today, we decide whether to launch feature X by June 30th. We have 25 minutes. My question, what's the one risk that would kill this if we ignore it? Then stop. Let the team take over. You'll be shocked how much faster and better your team thinks when you get out of the way. Leadership isn't about occupying space. It's about making space for ideas, voices, and collective wisdom. When you talk less, you reduce cognitive load on your team, signal trust in their judgment model, calm under pressure, create room for quiet contributors to emerge. This isn't abdication, it's elevation. So this week, in your next team meeting, speak only to frame and close. Say, "Today we decide X." Frame then, listen for 95% of the time. End with, "So we're doing Y by Z." Close, notice how your team steps up and how your influence grows through absence, as Lao Tzu might say. The best leaders are those who know when to step back so others can step forward. Let's talk about the ultimate act of leadership. Multiplying your influence by teaching others. In the rugged hills of Southern California, a U.S. Navy SEAL platoon prepared for deployment. Their mission, infiltrate a high-value target compound under total radio silence, no comms, no calls, no noise. Their commander, Lieutenant Eric Vance, didn't drill them on weapons or tactics first. He drilled them on silence. For 2 weeks, the team practiced moving, signaling, and making decisions without a single word. Hand signals, eye contact, pauses, presence at first. Frustration ran high. "How do we coordinate without talking?" they asked. Vance replied, "In chaos, words fail. But presence never does. Learn to lead with your stillness, and you'll never lose your team." On mission day, communication systems failed 40 minutes in, But the team adapted instantly, because they'd been trained to speak through restraint. They completed the mission. 0 casualties. Vance didn't just lead his team. He multiplied his leadership by teaching them the language of silence. You cannot teach what you do not embody. If you interrupt, over-explain, or dominate meetings, no workshop or memo will convince your team to do otherwise. But if you consistently demonstrate verbal discipline, your behavior becomes the cultural blueprint. This is called behavioral contagion. Emotions and habits spread faster through observation than instruction. So ask yourself, do I pause before responding to bad news? Do I let junior team members finish their thoughts? Do I cut my emails to the essential? Your team is watching, not your words, your patterns. Most leaders give feedback on what people say. Your data was solid, but rarely on how. They say it, you spoke for 12 minutes. Without a pause, let's work on brevity. Start offering style feedback. Your point was strong. Imagine how much more impact it would have had if you'd cut the first 2 minutes of setup. I noticed you apologized 3 times in that client call. Your expertise doesn't need softening. That silence after your proposal? Perfect. It let the idea breathe. Frame it as craft, not criticism. Great communicators aren't born, they're edited. Culture isn't declared. It's designed through rituals and rules. Try these team agreements. The 2-minute rule: no one speaks longer than 2 minutes without inviting input. Silence starts. All meetings begin with 5 minutes of quiet reading or reflection. Filler word tally. Lighthearted tracking of just sorry, like with gentle accountability. Pause prompts. Let's sit with that for 10 seconds before we react. At Patagonia, leadership meetings begin with a word count warning. If your update takes more than 90 seconds, it's not ready. These aren't restrictions. They're liberations, freeing minds from noise. When Priya Mehta became CEO of a 300-person SaaS company, she inherited a loudest voice wins culture. Meetings were dominated by a few extroverts. Quiet engineers disengaged. Decisions felt rushed. She didn't mandate change. She modeled it. She spoke last in every meeting she sent, concise. 1-paragraph strategy notes. She paused 5 seconds before answering tough questions. She publicly praised concise contributors. Jamal, your 3 sentences clarified the whole issue. In 6 months, meeting participation balanced. Employee surveys showed a 34% rise in I feel heard. Innovation pipeline doubled. She didn't train her team to be quiet. She made quiet valuable. Run this quarterly. The influence audit for your team? Record with consent a 30-minute team meeting. Analyze. Who spoke? For how long? How many filler words were used? How many pauses lasted more than 2 seconds? How many questions versus statements? Share insights with your team not as judgment, but as we're talking 80% of the time. What if we aimed for 60% and listened 40%? Use it to co-create new norms. Your personal influence is finite, but when you teach others to lead with presence, restraint, and precision, your impact becomes exponential. You create a culture of calm, authority where decisions are thoughtful, voices are diverse, and trust is deep. This is the ultimate legacy of a quiet leader. Not just what you built, but who you empowered to build after you. So this week, identify one emerging leader on your team. In your next one on model deep listening, verbal economy, and strategic silence. Then say, I've been working on speaking less to lead better. Want to try it together? Mentorship isn't about more words. It's about wiser silence shared. As Socrates might say, the best teachers don't fill minds. They open them.